2, 1.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of NomadLand on this Friday evening. I have my wonderful co-host Yaya. We have Cash on the mix.
I'm here.
We're ready to go. We have a special guest. I'll let Yaya introduce him.
And the special guest's name is Pouya Alimagham, a friend that I've known distantly. Everyone knows him from person from a few years back, so we'll get into all that. But as far as a little bit from his background, he got his bachelor's in Berkeley. He has his master's in Harvard. Another master's from the University of Michigan. He got his PhD from University of Michigan, currently teaching at MIT. He is a historian of the modern Middle East. He's going to elaborate a little bit more on that. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Really good to have you. I haven't seen you in so long.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, we were just talking about you saw him at University Park last time.
That's right. Shooting hoops and you were writing poetry.
Yeah, exactly. I was with my pen and paper. These guys were shooting hoops. That was the usual back in the day.
Uh-huh.
And so the modern Middle East, that's more specifically Iran, Iraq, and the Levant, is that, or in general all of?
So the modern Middle East, you would say, would go from Turkey in the north all the way east, as far as maybe depending on who you're talking to, Pakistan, Afghanistan as well.
Okay.
And then North Africa as well, so like Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria,
Okay.
and obviously Egypt.
So your expertise is on the whole region, not.
I studied the modern Middle East, but my forte would be actually Iran, Iraq, and the Levant.
Yeah. Because I think I read something about that. I was researching on it.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. Very cool, man.
What made you gravitate towards that area and that region particularly? Is it truly a passion, or it just happened to fall into that?
It's interesting that Efram brought that time where the shooting hoops and writing poetry, because I think that was a pivotal time in the lives of a lot of us.
Yeah.
A lot of us Iranians, second generation or first generation, Iranians in Orange County. For me, it began kind of in the fall of 2000 when the Palestinian Intifada, the Palestinian uprising began. There was a second Palestinian uprising. And before then, I was your typical Orange County Iranian kid. Like, I didn't really care much about anything besides maybe shooting some hoops, making money to spend on the car, having fun and being with friends. And, school was always just something that I did because we were supposed to do it.
Yeah.
There was no passion to it. And then the Intifada began, and it got me to be curious about the world beyond our, steel bubble that we live in Orange County.
Right.
And then through learning about the wider Palestinian history, I learned about the Iranian Revolution. I had always known about it. All of us who were born or raised in Iran or come from Iranian family, we know about the Iranian Revolution, nominally at least. And so learning about the Palestinian uprising almost became a conduit for me to learn about a history that was personal.
Right.
So then I got into Iran and Iranian history, modern Iranian history.
Okay.
And then that turned into another conduit to the wider region.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. It's
And
interesting. I feel like around that time, we all kind of have this image of what you're gonna do in life, what you want to do, but it's around that age and around that time that you really start picking up on passions and what really interests you and you want life decisions and what I want to do.
This was like what year? Like 1999, 2000.
I think it was like 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
Maybe around that time, and I got really into my music and writing and stuff, and you were getting into your stuff, and
Wow, 16 years ago.
Crazy.
Wow.
and are you currently teaching at MIT?
Yeah, so I teach. This fall, I'm teaching a course. Well, last fall I taught a course called. I didn't get to pick the course title. Like, they hired me to teach these courses. So last fall I taught a course called Palestine and the Arab-Israeli Conflict. Did not want to teach that course.
Can you repeat that again?
It's called Palestine and the Arab-Israeli Conflict.
Okay.
Did not want to teach that course, but it's a personal interest to me. But teaching it is another issue, right? And then I also taught Islam, the Middle East, and the West.
So what does that mean? You're fascinated with the subject, but you don't like teaching it?
So I like teaching a lot of different subjects within the modern Middle East. Teaching about the Arab-Israeli conflict in America is so contentious, right? Like, there's students who come there who are genuinely curious, right?
Yeah.
And then there's students who come in there to battle. They're not there to learn. And then there's outside forces outside of the university that are trying to stifle voices that present a counter media narrative of the conflict.
Sure.
Right. So like there's a for instance there's a professor. He was associate professor. One of these schools on the East Coast, like an actual established professor. and he got a tenure track off. He had a promotion to basically quit his job and come to a new university at the University of Illinois Urbana.
Okay.
Right, and then he basically quit his job and he was going there. And then in that summer before classes began, while he was in the process of moving, was when the latest conflict between Israel and the Palestinians began. It was It was the summer of 2014, the major Gaza offensive, the major Gaza war.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a Palestinian American, so it's something that's deeply personal to him. And he was on Twitter tweeting about it a lot, and he was like very angry, and you could tell.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
He wasn't using bad language. He wasn't like saying anything that was. It was just like kind of vulgar. Like he was talking about like, oh, the U.S. media is so, slanted in one direction that if the Israeli Prime Minister came and had a necklace full of Palestinian teeth, the media would probably still applaud him. Some stuff like that.
Yeah, so those kind of statements could automatically put you in this category.
Put you in a position, yeah. And so the alumni of the University of Illinois Urbana came down hard on the university because they heard that he was coming there, and he was fired.
Shit.
He was a tenured professor. He was fired, and then the administration was like, "Well, we've given you the offer, but you haven't begun, so we're not actually firing. We're rescinding our offer." So then he sued him. He sued him, and he
was that without any prior warnings or
no, without any prior warnings.
Really?
Yeah, and so he got lawyers and he sued, and I think they settled, so he more or less won. But that's my point. Right?
Yeah.
There's the outside forces that are trying to stifle, subversive academics on a number of subjects, but also in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but also in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Like when you teach something that goes against, it's critical of like U.S. interventions in the Middle East. There's a lot of people who are going to see. They're not going to judge you based on what you're saying and the analysis you're presenting or the facts that you're presenting. They're going to judge you as someone who is anti-American.
Or how they feel about it, however that makes them feel. So
like you're attacking their flag all of a sudden by being critical of a war that almost has no defense anymore.
That's right. So you have people in class yelling shit out like, fucking Nazi, you fucking Zionist.
Well, not in my class.
Either or, no.
I was paranoid about it. I was worried. So I didn't have any problems. My evaluations are good, but the fact that I had to go to class every day, mindful of those issues.
Yeah.
It's stressful.
I know. It's just not. Yeah,
it's
a comfortable
that's
situation.
not why I wanted to be an academic. So this fall, I was scheduled to teach those two courses again: Islam, the Middle East, and the West, and Palestine and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And there's another course that they co-teach. It's called How to Stage a Revolution, right? And the title is misleading. It's basically a class on revolutions, right?
Yeah.
So they asked me,
sounds like a good movie title.
Right?
Yeah,
maybe a good poster title too. Anyway, so they contacted me and they're like, "Look, we need someone. You studied the Iranian Revolution and the uprising and the Green Uprising and the Arab Spring. Would you like to co-teach this course and drop one of those other two classes?" I'm like, "Do I get to pick which class I drop?" Because I love the Islam, Middle East, and the West course, right? And then you could pick whatever class you want.
Sweet.
And I'm like, "I'm gonna drop the Palestine course." And they're like, "Why?" Like I was so resolute, I didn't hesitate, that they were surprised, and they're like, "Why?" I'm like, "Because it's contentious, it's stressful, I don't need it."
Yeah. And so going back to the revolution part, I know you're kind of sort of an expert on revolutions and the history of the Iranian Revolution and other revolutions in the area. But you did your thesis on how basically the Iranian Green Uprising affected the Arab Spring.
No. There was a unit, like I probably talked about that in a couple of pages.
Okay.
Because you know how Iranians like to give themselves a lot of credit. Sometimes it's due, sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
I remember like polo,
Yeah.
the actual like sport of polo. I remember I was in a dentist's office and the dental hygienist was an Iranian woman, and she's like, Iranians invented polo. And I was just another one of those Iranians who claimed. But it actually turned out to be true.
Yeah, both sketchy. They were the goats, it's like Afghans still do it.
Very
popular.
Really?
But the Green Uprising, to a certain extent, almost discouraged the Arab Spring because it failed.
Oh, okay.
It failed. Yeah. And so in Tunisia, when it happened, so I ended up having access to interviews on Egyptian activists in Egypt who were anti-government, their own government in Cairo.
Yeah.
Who were hoping that the Iranian uprising would succeed, and were on Twitter using Google Translate, tweeting from either English into English into Persian, or Arabic into Persian, tweeting to Iranians inside Iran, telling them which embassies were offering first aid in the uprising.
Wow.
Because they were hoping that the uprising would succeed, not because they don't like the Iranian government because they were hoping that
they could ride the wave. And
ride the wave,
yeah,
exactly. And so, it failed. I mean, there's a lot of victories that happened in the uprising.
Yeah.
Obviously, it didn't cancel the elections. The government's still in power. But there was a lot of other micro victories. But the Egyptians ultimately looked towards Tunisia. But there are for sure lessons that were learned. Like, this was the first modern uprising that used social media, text messaging, YouTube.
Yeah, that was crazy.
YouTube
the
was
way
nuts.
things were getting out, that didn't happen before. Yeah.
So YouTube was interesting because, like, Twitter and stuff, the role of Twitter was kind of overplayed. It was way overplayed, right? Word of mouth was one of the things that got people going, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about YouTube was that what ended up happening was when the uprising began, is the government expelled all the foreign journalists, right? And the idea is usually when there's more eyes and there's more cameras, the government is less inclined to be cracking down and cracking heads, right? So when they expelled all these journalists, a lot of these kids who were on the streets were obviously worried, but then they became their own journalists, right? They were citizen journalists, and they were recording it and they were sending it, and the internet was brought down really slow, but they sent it to using Dropbox and other like file sharing sites,
and they went viral.
They sent them to people who were Iranians who were abroad who took it and then broadcast it. So there's like certain clashes that happened in the uprising with like 5 or 6 different camera views, not because there were 5 or 6
real unbiased
CNN or BBC journalists,
live footage,
but 5 or 6 actual activists. So that footage almost, they televised their own revolution in a way.
That's right. Yeah. But I guess what I was getting at is to your thesis. I guess your whole thesis wasn't on that, but you related it to the Iranian uprising, but it was more about Egypt, and you kind of foresaw the coup in Egypt a couple of years in advance.
Yeah. So that was that wasn't a dissertation. That was a academic article I published at the UCLA Historical Journal.
That's what it was.
It's hard to actually foresee events, right? Historians are not supposed to foresee events. Like I said, like there's political commentators you see on CNN and stuff who prophesize events, and then when they don't happen, they try to clean it up by prophesizing another one, and they end up looking like a fool. That's not what we try to do as historians. We try to analyze what's happened, try to analyze the present, so that we know to learn from our mistakes, more or less, as human beings. What happened in 2013 with the coup in Egypt, a lot of how the United States and the Egyptian military handled the Egyptian uprising in the Arab Spring in 2011 goes back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
Okay, so not the Green Uprising.
Not the Green Uprising.
The Iranian Revolution. Okay, got you.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, do you want me to summarize it without boring you to death?
Yeah, sure.
Are you sure?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, in a way, also, when people listen to, they have this interest of listening to it and understanding it and making it something educational for them, because there's going to be a lot of different types of people that are listening.
Sure.
To it. So yeah, summarizing that would be definitely great.
Like
Good.
a picture book, one pop-up book.
Yeah, so I'll try to visualize colors for everybody.
Yeah.
So long story short, when the revolution happened in 1978-79 in Iran, the Shah's government didn't have a proper security force. They had a proper military, but the military was designed for war with other countries, to safeguard the country's borders, right? It wasn't designed like that. The Shah basically unleashed tanks and soldiers on the population. That's not what they were designed to do. And they were conscripts. So a lot of these conscripts, the more the Shah tried to fight the revolution with his army, the more defections it suffered. Because these were conscripts who were basically told to fire on not only their own countrymen, but maybe their brothers and sisters and parents.
Yeah.
So as the revolution progressed, Charles Kurzban, who's a sociologist, he's actually a Persian-speaking American sociologist. He wrote a book called The Unthinkable Revolution. It's one of the many foundational books on the Iranian Revolution. And he basically chronicles how by, I think, January 1979, the Shah's force was up to 55%. 45% had defected or quit or resigned, right?
40%.
40 to 45% had defected,
That's
right? And so,
half. That's
and the idea was that, and that's also why they couldn't keep fighting the revolution, because the more they fought, the more the military unraveled. And so and ultimately it completely collapsed, right? Because
many of them probably, shared those ideas, and they were like, they agreed with the revolution, they wanted it,
And then the last 2 days, February 10th and 11th, when there was an actual guerrilla uprising, Fadayan and Mujahideen, they started raiding barracks and raiding police stations and prisons and stuff, like releasing prisoners. There was a 2-day insurrection, and the military, everything kind of collapsed. The state collapsed, and then there was a political vacuum. And so when Khomeini and them came in, there was no real internal barricade against them.
Sure.
And they ended up creating a parallel military force called the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, and there was no real mechanism by which to stop Khomeini and the revolution internally, or for the United States to commandeer the revolution in a direction that was amenable to its interests.
Sure.
Right? Because the revolution was very much against the United States, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In 2011, the regime of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt basically didn't make that mistake. The military didn't do anything. The military stood on the sidelines, right? Stood on the sidelines, and then at the time, Admiral Fallon, I think that was his name, who was Joint Chief of Staffs. He was like the main military man in DC. He came on TV and was like, "Look, everyone, all the news media in America was worried about this revolution, or another revolution in a Muslim country, another Khomeini, another Islamist." And he's like, "Yeah, we're not really worried. We have established contacts with the military. Like, it's not what you guys think, right?" And what that meant was that the regime didn't sick the military against the population. It had a parallel security force. And it sent this parallel security force that didn't exist in Iran at the 1978-79 revolution, existed in Egypt, and basically pit those forces against the revolution. So if you look at the demands of the revolutionaries, they basically would say, "Well, Hosni Mubarak to resign. We want to make sure his sons have no place in the future, because they were being groomed to succeed him." And they also said that we don't want the security forces have to be disbanded. They didn't say anything about the military being disbanded. Like the military actually said, the military are our brothers, right? So after 3 weeks of uprising, the military deposed Hosni Mubarak and took power. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, the SCAF,
I remember that.
took power, and they were deemed as the saviors of the country. Right, very different, and that was
complete opposite role in front of the people.
Yeah, so that's the precedent of 1979, like, because the Iranian Revolution was so traumatic for Americans, right? Like the Iran went from being extremely pro-United States, being the policeman, the gendarme of the Middle East for the United States, to ultimately taking 52 Americans from the U.S. Embassy hostage
0 to 100
for
real quick,
444 days
Yeah.
to fighting U.S. interests all across the region. And so it was so traumatic for Americans that they learned from that lesson, and all the governments in the region, because the Iranian Revolution was traumatic for them too. Because Iran under Khomeini was calling for the export of the revolution to the whole Muslim world,
Right.
and calling on Muslims in these countries to rise up. And there were indeed uprisings.
South America too, maybe.
I mean,
If we're gonna go there.
You guys seen that like Argentinian guy started, like, not related to what you're saying, but this Argentinian guy that has a huge Khomeini tattoo on his arm, like big, and he was like in these protests in South America. I don't know if it was Brazil or Argentina.
he could have been like of Lebanese descent, right? Because
Possibly,
in Latin
yeah.
America, there's a lot of Lebanese, and a lot of these Lebanese are Shiite Muslims. And it's interesting because for Iranians, it's weird. Iranians, at least in the United States, because they have a distinct perspective when it comes to Iran. It's hard for them to imagine Khomeini as being favorable to anybody else. But for Muslims, and particularly Shiite Muslims across the region, Shiite Muslims historically are the most marginalized communities in the Middle East.
That's right.
Most oppressed, massacred time and again, especially in the modern period, including Afghanistan under the Taliban. And so the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution, was empowering to them. Like, not just a symbolic empowering. I'm talking about like actual arms and training and funding and organizing. Like the Iranian government has been arming and training and funding Shiite Muslims across the Muslim.
And the idea of it becoming so huge, something that really started from almost something very small, right? It's just the belief of, it's possible.
Yeah. So
That's interesting.
That was
so vital.
That's really interesting because it was a non-violent revolution, more or less. Throughout the 14th, it turned into
the People's Revolution.
It turned into a 2-day armed insurrection, the last 2 days. But that 14-month period was non-violent, and it taught. And if you guys, I was gonna say if you guys remember, none of us remember, we weren't alive then. But the Shah's military at the time, its air force rivaled, at least in technology, it rivaled that of the Royal Air Force in Britain. Its military was so vast. and it came crumbling down in the face of a largely non-violent, protracted revolution.
That's
And so-
fascinating. And you think that there wasn't any foreign hands involved in that revolution? I always wondered about that. Outside of obviously the, what is it, BBC or the French media that was kind of giving Khomeini his platform.
All right, I'm gonna address that in one second. I just want to finish the fact that the revolution was so non-violent and brought down such a powerful regime. To Erfan's point, was not a lesson lost on neighboring countries, neighboring populations. For the governments, it freaked them out. For the populations, it was inspiring. It really was, right? In terms of the foreign involvement, you have no idea how many times I've been asked this question, right?
And I still don't have an answer, by the way.
It's I've been asked it all the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to have the official answer.
No, it's not official. I'll tell you my thoughts, and I'll tell you what other historians and sociologists will tell you. So there's conspiracy theories, right? The Shah had cancer, he was dying. We want the United States wanted to replace him with somebody else. His son was too young at the time. It was like Reza Pahlavi was like 2021. Or there's this whole like Karamanlis Sabs, the green belt theory, right? That by supporting Islamic ideology as a natural counterweight to Marxism or communism in the region, it would serve American Cold War purposes, right?
Okay.
Oh, never thought of that.
That's a very like it's a theory that's gained a lot of traction for years too,
That's
right?
very interesting.
But most historians, I'm talking about like Yervand Abrahamian at City University of New York, who's probably the most eminent Iranian historian in the English language, maybe in any language, because his books are translated too. Hamid Dabashi, Misaq Parsa, Mansur Muaddel, I'm a bird compared to these people, right? They all kind of balk at that idea, right? Mainly because it deprives Iranians of agency, right? Like, when you're facing a regime that powerful, that has implemented a military government and declares martial law, and the protests are continuing, right? If you look at the news articles, because my dissertation covered this, when you look at the news articles from that time period, 1978, Ashura, 1970, Ashura being the annual commemoration of Imam Hussein's martyrdom.
Right.
The Ashura protests of December 10th, 1978, until that point in human history, was the largest protest event in world history. Right? And there was a real concern that the Shah, even though he had implemented a military government, was allowing this protest to happen in order to snuff it out in one fell swoop, a military crackdown. So the New York Times and them were all interviewing, Sheikh this, Imam that, and all these other participants. They're like, what do you think? And like, I don't know. Like, 100,000 cars had been removed from Tehran, because they was worried about a crackdown ruining cars, right? Cars are expensive, obviously, especially.
I didn't get that. So they removed cars.
So like civilians were removing cars from Tehran.
They were worried about their cars
being destroyed. Yeah.
Okay.
Like people had been buying kaffans, their burial shrouds, right? The Shah had aligned tanks at a place that was visible to those people to intimidate them. There was helicopters over their heads, and yet, like legit, anywhere between 10. No one really knows the number. 10 to 17 million people. At the time of Iran's population between 33 to 36 million.
Mind blowing.
10 to 17 million people came out, right? Now, they did you have to imagine that these are Iranians who understand they're there. They understand the threat that they face. That's why I was talking about the cars being removed, the burial shrouds, because they know so many people had died in this revolution. This was like the climax of the revolution. They did a cost-benefit analysis. You have to trust that these are Iranians who are rational like we are. They did a cost-benefit analysis. They're like, look, this is a revolution. I may die if I participate on this day, but like what participating or not participating is if I don't participate and let this all happen or let nothing happen is equivalent to death. So I'd rather participate and basically die on my feet, right? So they did this cost benefit analysis and it came out, right? And the reason why I say it's really dangerous to blame on foreigners, because the Iranian government does the same thing, right? When the uprising happened in 2009, the Iranian government was trying to rob those same Iranians, the next generation of Iranians, of their agency, right? Saying, hame fitnegaran, right? They're seditionists, working at the hands of the Israelis and the British and Americans, right? And it's the same cost-benefit analysis. Those Iranians who had been in Iran, all their lives, who know that government better than any one of us, did their own cost-benefit analysis, knew the threat that they had faced, and they came out. Right? So the Iranian government wants to discredit them and say that these are foreign agents or
and I used to get messages from some of those kids, not too many, but a few here and there. They're like, just like these Shaw flags. Like, don't wave that shit. Tell people to stop doing that. You know, they want to establish it being an organic thing and it has no outside influence. Because as soon as you do that, you're pretty much putting some dirt over the movement, right?
Sure.
Those flags and those I saw the videos in Irvine on McMichelson and Culver.
That was damaging for the movement.
You know, it was damaging. It was demoralizing to every single one of us who saw it. You know, people just tearing down each other's flags. You know, like they're over there facing down batons and bullets and tear gas and imprisonment and torture.
Mm-hmm.
And we're fighting over what flag.
What flag?
And
people, the ridiculous chants. They're like the horrible chants that people will say together.
That's
and
what Cersei Lannister won.
It was just really bad. But in comparison, I mean, you said 10 to 17 million people came out for the actual revolution. Do you know the estimate numbers for the Green Movement when people were coming?
So it's really funny. So I December 15th. The election. December 15th. I'm sorry. The elections happened June 12th.
Dude,
right?
I'm so like I could not do what he does. He remembers all these dates.
No, these are like consequential dates.
No, I know. I
don't know if I should be flattered or offended.
No, you should be flattered. Like I can't.
That's why you do what you do.
Yeah, I don't remember my parents' birthdays, and that's June consequential.
June 12, 2009. That was the election.
Yeah.
That night, the elections were revealed to be in Ahmadinejad's favor. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
June 13th. Was a Saturday, was a bit of rioting because people were so reactive to that news. And then the media the Iranian media came out and like, look at these like Hassan Khashoggi and look at how
that was the word.
They're hooligans and stuff like that. And then the movement kind of started to take shape and it started to kind of like be more organized and focused. By June 15th, 3 days after elections, just in Tehran, there was about 3 million people just in Tehran, right? Now this number is so debated. It's so debated. You know, you guys know Iran better. I mean, you guys have lived in Iran better more than I have.
Yeah. I lived
if you want to
in
cross these main streets like Vali Asr, there's no pedestrian crosswalk. It's a bridge, right? There's actually YouTube videos of people on these bridges on Vali Asr taking footage of this protest. You don't see where it begins and ends. And then he turns around, does a 180 turn, and you see
same
a
thing
whole
all
nother,
the way back the other way. Yeah,
oh, that's crazy.
Now, I think it was Ghalibaf at the time. I think it was mayor of Tehran at the time. He said there was 3 million people that came out. And then that article came down. Because that number, by an official admitting to this number, is embarrassing. So there's actually no numbers online anymore. But you don't need numbers because that YouTube video says it all. And there's no denying it. And that's just in Tehran. That's just in Tehran.
But still, it would get dwarfed by the, if you as a percentage of the population compared to the revolution, that was like a lot more people.
The revolution was different. Yeah.
That's the very end of it. I mean, there were many protests before that final one.
Yeah, the Austria, that one event we were talking about in 1978, the population in Iran was less than half of what it was in 2009. The percentage was more. Much more. Also because that generation was different. You had ideologies. You had, they had experienced Pahlavi rule. They had ideologies that demanded sacrifice, right? And I'm not trying to knock the 2009 generation. They had, who we just judge them? They're the ones that faced everything down, right? But in the 21st century, and you ask them too, they're like, we didn't want many of them, not all of them, like we didn't want revolutionary change, right? In 1978,
it's more reform based.
Or cancel the elections, reform, or some of them actually did want it. The more and this is basic sociological theory. Basic sociological theory. The more the protests continued, the harsher the government crackdown became. And so even when Neda Agha Sultan was killed, she was killed in a very dramatic fashion. That demobilized a lot of people. Like a lot of parents who, before her death in 2009, sympathized with their children. They're like, look, we understand that we don't want you to go.
You're saying it scared people?
Yeah. So we don't want
Some
you to.
would argue otherwise, though. It became the poster child.
So there's two things that happened, right? One is that her death captivated world attention to the Green Movement.
Right.
But on a real emotional level. So it was good PR, right? But on an emotional level, for those who were there, when she died, before she died, a lot of parents didn't want their children participating in the revolution, in the uprising. But then they're like, we understand, and these are people I've interviewed from my research. Like, we understand because we fought for our ideals, 30 years prior, so we're not going to stop you. But when she died after that, and the dramatic fashion in which she died,
it became real.
Yeah, it became so
Death
much more
became
real.
tangible.
Yeah. So then parents became much more adamant about keeping their
Right.
keeping their children from the protest. So the uprising tapered off. So the numbers became fewer, but those who came out were the more radical of the ones. So the slogans began to change.
Okay.
So it went from
It
saying
changed.
like, yeah, so it went from going like, you know, Ya Hussein, Mir Hussein,
رأی ما رو
رأی
دزدیدن
ما
دارن باز
کجاست
About
to
that.
این ماه خون است سید علی سرنگون است. This is a Muharram slogan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the
That's
slogan's radicalized.
Mm. That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
That's do you think that movement lacked a strong, competent vocal leader?
Yes, that's good. That's a legit question. I appreciate that question very much.
Yeah.
So the good thing about the movement is that it didn't have a central leader. Every person was its own leader. Every person was its own general. That was one of the things that was good about it.
Right.
And a lot of times it took the leadership by surprise.
Yeah.
It did. And that was
They
one of the-
became part of the movement
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than leading it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Musavi, let's be real. I mean, you know,
Now-
he's like an emo art student. Like, you know, the way he talks, and it's just so.
Yeah,
And that's so important, right? I mean, the way you speak, I think that's what wins every election, pretty much. to
Yeah.
me. You know, the personality and how you speak. I mean, just right now, the same thing. Like Donald Trump was just a better speaker, more confident when he spoke than Hillary. And won.
He
And I
wasn't
mean,
a better
it's
speaker.
just-
He spoke in more simplistic terms.
Yeah, I'm more confident. You know,
Sure.
he didn't
What are you trying to say?
stutter as much.
People like sound bites.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm saying like he didn't stutter as much as Hillary, and didn't have to look down at the paper because I mean,
Yeah.
like, because he doesn't have to think about what he's saying. It's easy to do that, right?
And they were tired of what
Yeah.
that bitch had to say.
But not to clown Musavi though. Musavi, like before the elections, people were like, why should we vote? Right? Then when those television debates happened, and television debates had happened before, but in 2009 was the first time they were one-on-one, and one-on-one creates a more adversarial, focused debate. And if you guys probably saw the footage, like it was the debate was so bitter, and the stuff that Musavi was saying about corruption and all these things. Everyone's like, oh, so there is a difference between these two, and if we vote for one, it may actually have a material impact on our lives. So he was the reason why so many people were excited about the elections. Now about leadership after after turning from a campaign to a protest movement, he was one of its personalities. So was Rahnavard and so was Karoubi.
And Khatami to some.
Khatami for sure.
Yeah.
But these are still people who are part of that system. Musavi is called Nakhost Vazir Imam. He was the longest serving prime minister to Khomeini.
Mm-hmm.
Rajai, Bahana, they were all killed. He was the last prime minister actually, because after him they basically excised that position
Yeah,
from the
they
constitution.
changed it.
So he's still there may be factionalism within the Iranian government, but these aren't revolutionary leaders. Musavi
Right.
is not a revolutionary. Karoubi is not a Karoubi was Speaker of Parliament at one point too. Even Rafsanjani, who like came out on the side of the opposition with his July Friday sermon, his khutbah, was one of the largest khutbahs in a long time because people came out basically under the cover of his khutbah really to protest. But still, even Rafsanjani, these aren't revolution. They're revolution in the sense
They're like
that
a
they were
Che
part of the
Guevara
Iranian
type, yeah.
revolution, not that they want to bring the Iranian revolution or the Iranian government that was born in that revolution down.
Very interesting.
Let's just ask a few more questions on this and then like move
That's
on
what
from
I'm
the
gonna
green
say.
movement.
Yeah, there's a lot
just-
we want to ask you. So.
I guess the last question I have in that regard is: do you think, in your personal opinion, that the elections, the votes were real or not?
Yeah, so
Because didn't they actually hire an outside agency to come and look into it, and everything was accurate?
You know what? There's so many conflicting reports, right? And I actually like talked about in my dissertation. I talked about why there is doubt over the elections. Right?
Okay.
But I also said that it almost doesn't matter because the perception of what happened is what matters, right?
Yeah.
But one thing is for certain, and Iranians need to come to this reality. They have to face this reality because so many Iranians in the United States, in the West, and even some in Iran who create their own bubbles, they think that
Delusional.
everyone agrees with them
Yeah.
and that
yeah.
like Ahmadinejad did not have, because they went to their own rallies and they saw how massive their rallies were. They saw all their friends and family excited about Musavi, and they're like, how could our candidate lose?
And we're annoyingly emotional people.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say all that to them because
Yeah.
you would get an emotional reaction, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
And again, I think that mirrors the recent election here because everybody's like, "There's no way Donald Trump's
Yeah.
gonna win." Like, you know,
Me
he
included.
didn't even think he's gonna win. You know, so everybody was shocked on that.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah.
Yeah, if you're in California, or I was in Massachusetts at the time, these are blue states.
Yeah.
And so when I went to school that day to teach, my students came to class like sad and emotional and tired and stuff, and you were like, who voted for this guy? Because everyone I know voted for Hillary or didn't vote.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole another side to this country that we don't get to see every day because that's not within our worldview or within our periphery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Iran's the same.
Mm-hmm. Same thing with artists. Like, it's funny. Like, we have this thing. There's certain Iranian artists, singers, that I talk to a lot of people through music, through friends, family, and I don't know one person who's their fan, right? But they have millions of fans. I'm like, who the hell are these people who listen to this guy? But it's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
it's like
that's the same thing. And the Iranian government's no different. It has a lot of opposition, millions, as we saw in the Green Movement, but also has a lot of support. I can't quantify it. I can't give you a percentage because I don't think we're allowed to know percentages. There's no Gallup poll in Iran, right?
Yeah.
But it does have support.
Yeah,
and
for
that's
sure.
why
Absolutely.
and that's why it persists. And it persists in very unusual times. If you look at the Middle East, all the countries that were independent, I'm not saying they're good, but the governments that are independent, Afghanistan under the Taliban, Syria under Bashar al-Assad, Iraq under that demon Saddam Hussein, Libya under Gaddafi. These are all countries that were independent and they've been destroyed, more or less. And those other countries that haven't been destroyed are fully dependent on the United States. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Egypt. There's only one country in the region that is both independent and secure, and that's Iran. And that's partly because it's not that 99% of the Iranian population hates the government. Because if that was the case, we'd have a lot that turmoil that's happening in the region would be spilling into Iran very easily.
Absolutely. I think even the people who want change, for the most part, they don't want a revolution. They want a complete. They just want things to get fixed. The things
on
that
a gradual
but gradual,
consistent basis.
Consistently, exactly. But I want to move away from Iran, and because I've been on your Twitter, and you got some serious beef with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
I think these are easy questions. You got to pitch me some hard balls. That's an easy one.
Yeah.
I feel, and it's actually a good time, because 10 years ago, you'd feel like you're the only one that has beef with the Saudi government. Now it's becoming, I wouldn't say mainstream, but it's becoming, an issue that people are starting to understand. So Saudi Arabia has a very deleterious impact on a lot of things, on the region, the Middle East, on democracy in the Middle East, and on Islam, for sure.
Absolutely.
One of the things about Islam that we forget, because we're living in 2017 now, is that there is no such thing as one Islam, right? There's debate and
let's talk about that.
Yeah, there's debate and there's conversation and there's different schools of thought. There's different practices. There's different levels of rigidity, and there's Sufism and all these things. Saudi, through its petrodollars, its billions of dollars it gets from oil sales, is spreading through all corners of the Muslim world. It has been doing so for decades, partially as a response to the Iranian Revolution, right? Because it's trying to fight. Because when the Iranian Revolution happened, the Khomeini was trying to spread it to the Muslim world, especially the Persian Gulf area, specifically Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait, and Bahrain. The Saudi response to that was, because Khomeini said, "I'm the leader of the Muslim world, and all these governments are puppet, anti-God, or secular." But definitely puppet governments, and they should all be overthrown. And there was uprisings.
Sure.
And the Saudi response to that was, in order to convince its population, its Saudi population, and also the Muslim world, it played on Iran's Achilles heel. Iran's Achilles heel.
He's Shiite.
It's that it's a minority. It's a minority branch of Islam. So it spread. The Saudis began with their billions of dollars spreading a hardline Wahhabi Sunni doctrine to other Sunni countries that was anti-Shiite by definition. And I'm talking about, when I talk about anti-Shiite, I'm talking about violently anti-Shiite. And the idea was not only to spread it to its own population in Saudi Arabia, but to spread it to the Muslim world so that other countries wouldn't heed Iran's example. Because for the Saudis, if the revolution spreads to another country, and then to another country, then it has that domino effect.
Sure.
Then maybe the Saudi population will learn from it as well, right? And also because the Saudi Shiites, there's about a quarter of the Saudi population is Shiite, and they're also very restive. Because imagine being a Saudi Shiite in a country
They're
that thinks that you're
constantly-
not only you're below a non-Muslim. So there's Shiite, there's Jews and Christians, which Muslims are supposed to consider people of the book, and they're supposed to be respected, and have their rights are supposed to be respected, right? For the Wahhabi doctrine, Shiites are not only infidels, but they made a heresy of Islam. Right?
Yeah, I was gonna, because I'm not an expert on the subject, but I think there are some ancient Wahhabi doctrines that it's okay to even kill a Shiite.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. So that's the creed that's been exported, right? And the idea was that it's also basically popularized in its own country in order to prevent Saudi Shiite and Sunni unity within the country. It's a divide and conquer policy within the country and abroad.
So you think that's been a form of control for the Saudis and the Saudi population? Now let me play devil's advocate. I mean, I would imagine in my experience, if you speak to a Saudi, they would say that you're discrediting them, because a lot of them don't feel that way. Even on college campuses, whenever I did speak to a Saudi kid, every single one of them said, I want to go back. But if you talk to an Iranian kid, they're like, I don't want to go back to that place. So why is that? It really seems that they love living in their country. They love getting their degree and going back to their country and doing what they do. Which to
why
me,
not?
to me, that was interesting.
I think part of that is probably because of a lot of the Saudis who are here, they're here on government fund and basically grants, and maybe they're somehow kind of more close to the on the government side, but when Iranians is usually we're migrants and we kind of escape that reality. And even when the students and they come here, for example, somebody comes from Sanati Sharif and they go to Stanford here, they want to leave the country. I mean, they have a goal.
So you think I'm drawing a sample size from a population that is somehow related to the government? Or
So to Irfan's point is right on. So a lot of these students that are here on Saudi government scholarship.
Right.
And believe it or not, I'm not gonna. I'll just tell you guys.
well, that's how they're here. Every single one of them that I
But
spoke
here's
to
the thing,
was
though.
here from that.
It's not just the funding.
Right.
Because the Shah also in the 70s sent Iranians, paid for Iranians to come to the United States
That's
to study,
true.
and they were really anti-Shah.
That's very
right. In these Persian Gulf countries, because they're so worried about dissent, that they make you sign a document. Like, I've had students, I'm like, why don't you speak up in class? And they're like, yeah, I signed a document. I can't.
Interesting.
Right? And also, there's a gender perspective. Did you only talk to boys or did you talk to girls?
I don't know how to identify Saudi women. It's just they weren't out there.
Right, okay. So
I missed that.
if you talk to Saudi women,
They're
you
not
might get a
chilling
different
at the pool
answer,
area.
right?
Yeah.
So I had a Saudi male student in my class.
A lot of things might happen to you if you talk to Saudi women. It's dangerous. Oh, yeah.
I had a male student.
Unveil to you, bitches.
I had a male student tell me that he was talking about the role of technology and protests, right, in Saudi Arabia, or technology and self-expression, not protest. And he's like, yeah, you guys think that there's no democracy in Saudi Arabia. We may not have elections, but we still express ourselves, and the government heeds our comments. So we have Twitter. I'm like, yeah, and government listens. We have our own hashtags, and we say things on on the down low, and the government hears us and may adjust, may not adjust. It's not like this authoritarian, total, absolute dictatorship that you guys all think. And I was like, yeah, interestingly, you're right. Technology is changing things.
Yeah.
I'm like, Uber is a big deal in Saudi Arabia. I'm like, why do you think that is? And this is when that gender perspective comes into play. And he's like, I don't know. Why is it a big deal? I'm like, can women drive? And he's like, women don't drive. He said, look at the way he phrased it. He's like, women in Saudi Arabia don't drive. As if they're voluntarily not driving. Right? The way he phrased it, they cannot drive. They are not allowed to drive. So Uber is a big deal for them because they're not dependent on their male counterparts to drive. They just, Uber it and they go wherever they need to go.
Yeah.
Right? But that gender perspective, who you're talking to get that perspective is important because class, gender, sexual orientation, religion, where they're from in the country, can all impact the way they formulate their ideas. If you're from Berkeley, California, which is like a very leftist area, that area is going to impact you versus if you're from somewhere like Topeka, Kansas or something, right? And the same thing, if you're from North Tehran or you're from Qom, it's going to be different perspective.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Or if you're like, and we do this in my class, I was talking about it last night. I try to get my students, we don't just go into this history. because they're going to selectively pick and choose what they want that affirms their preconceived worldview. We got to get them to deconstruct the baggage they're bringing into this class, so they understand that their lens has been skewing their worldview.
Sure.
You know, I asked them, like, what does it mean to you if the only movie you've seen on the Middle East is American Sniper and Lone Survivor?
Sure.
That glorifies war and shows like Arabs, Iraqis, and Afghans as these savages. You start looking at the region through the prism of war, through the crosshairs of a sniper rifle, perhaps. And then I had them go see Asghar Farhadi's Salesman, Furushande, that was at the time it was nominated. It won, but at the time it was nominated, it was playing at a theater by our campus. So I had them go see it, and this was the first time that I'd seen a movie on the Middle East made by Middle Easterners. And that to them, there's like a cognitive revolution happening. You know, they're seeing like people doing normal stuff. There's no longer beards and guns and bombs and stuff like that. And I had them write a reflective paper for me. And one of them, it was mind-blowing what she said. She's like, the movie began with an earthquake or something shaking. Because if you guys remember, there's a building that was underneath there was some construction. It was ruining the foundation of the building, and the building was about to collapse. And she's like, I thought, because this is a movie about Iran and everything I've seen on the news about Iran, I thought that this was a terrorist attack and it was an explosion, that this building was about to collapse.
Wow, that's funny.
And afterwards, like immediately afterwards, I realized how silly it was for me to think that. And it was just some construction.
See, that's the process of like dehumanizing a whole nation through media and like stuff that they constantly hit you, and it's crazy. And that's the part that I have a big problem with. I mean, because of the shit that our governments do and say, the agendas the Saudi government has, Iranian government has. I mean, there's such a, I feel like, basically, I have Saudi friends. I lived in Dubai for a while. I have Saudi friends. I have Saudi friends in the States. Some who moved back to Saudi Arabia who live there. And I mean, the warmest people get along.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
dope.
just like, right?
I like
in
them.
general, Arabs are really warm people, and I've had like really good experiences with them. You know,
Yeah,
but
I agree.
because of the way things are, they create. I feel like Iranians sometimes inside of Iran who haven't had contact with Arabs, and same thing, maybe some Arabs who haven't had contacts with Iranians, they have these like demonizing views of each other, and it's bullshit, you know, and it creates something that basically a really small minority of the two countries create this like propaganda about each other, and then, you know, it kind of hits, and, you know, nations start hating each other.
Well, yeah, I mean, that happened because we would usually talk about soccer with these Saudi kids, and they'd be like, why do your people throw bottles and throw rocks at us when we're playing? I was like, oh shit, I was under the impression that you guys are doing that, because I get the sports media from Iran, right? So we were pretty much saying the same thing. And then I was like, oh shit, it works both ways, you know. So to me, it was like, it's really propaganda on both sides, more than likely. Even though they probably do it more, but that's still probably my programming,
For us who've been here for this long, we're fully aware of the dehumanization that happens, not just by Iranians, but across the board with all Muslims, right? And that partially explains Trump's appeal. It really does, partially.
So let's talk about that.
He played on that xenophobia.
Are you Muslim?
You know,
and if you want, we can just erase.
No, it's a question. I come from.
If you don't want me to go personal,
I indeed come from a Muslim background. And when I say like
the only reason I brought it up is because on your social media you show prayers and you show you're in a mosque, and on your Twitter it's the Shiraz Mosque, I think, right? The colorful.
Yeah, actually that's just something I found online. It's just beautiful.
The Isfahan Mosque is much nicer.
Yeah, I've been there too.
That's what all the Muhammads say. But I'm kidding.
All the Mohammedans. That was like the pre.
That's how they used to call Islam.
Yeah, Mohammedan.
Right.
But
I just want to hear what he has to say about that.
So I'm actually not particularly pious, right? But you know, and Irfan knows me from back in the day. Like, you know, I grew up in Orange County. You know, I'm a fluent Persian speaker. I can read and write. I did a lot of my research for my dissertation in Persian, but my English was always dominant. And one of the things why I became a historian of the modern Middle East, in particular Iran, was the more I learned about that history, the more I was in tune with my heritage. And Islam is part of that heritage.
I get it. You have a cultural standpoint, but do you consider that to be your religion of choice?
My religion of choice is not to be religious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in terms of like, so you know, there's this. So most people look at Islam as a rigid set of rules. You got to pray 5 times a day. You can't eat alcohol. You can't drink alcohol. You can't eat pork. You can't gamble. You can't
Yeah.
Fornicate before marriage. Right? And then, there's the academic perspective on Islam too that I learned from Hamid Dawashi, who's a Columbia University professor, right? And he's like, look, Islam is a discourse as well, right? So for instance, when you're born, you don't know what's right and what's wrong. These are things that you learn from your culture and your upbringing, right?
Okay.
And even me, when I was born, I was born in Iran, but I grew up in the United States.
Right.
But I was raised in an Iranian household. So my conception of right and wrong was through my parents. And they came from Iran, right? And they came from a culture of which Islam is a big part, right? So let me give you an example, right? If you saw, right now, if you went to like Irvine Spectrum and you saw a man hitting his wife, a big man hitting his wife.
Should probably desert. No, okay.
If you saw a big man hitting his wife, naturally speaking, your instinct is to survive. Naturally speaking, you're gonna make none of my business, right? But because of the way we were raised, because of that cultural background, you're like, no, this is a distinct injustice happening. And you may do something about it, you may not do something, but you feel that pain.
Yeah.
That's part of that heritage. That, when I was raised, I learned about Imam Ali. I learned about Imam Hussein, right? Not as these like infallible beings who had a right to the caliphate of the Prophet Muhammad, right? Right to be his heir, but as like paragons of virtue. You know what I mean? And so I may not like, look at Imam Ali as this infallible being. But as a kid, when I was raised, I learned about what was right and what was wrong through stories of that. And that still colors my perspective on a subconscious level.
So you're basically saying that there is good things in Islam that you're taking out, but you don't necessarily follow everything to the T.
In the doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, same with the United States. I was raised here. There's certain things that I was raised with, growing up as an American or growing up in an American setting, that I'm not a Christian. But like, we grew up here and you learn about Jesus and all that stuff, and that still on a subconscious level has impacted every single one of us, whether we realize it or not.
Definitely.
But can we say that though? I mean, about religion, or what you say about Hamid Dawashi, is that what you're saying?
Hamid Dawashi,
yeah, where there's the academic Islam or whatnot. Can we really separate those things and take out
I
the
didn't
good?
say that was an academic Islam. Academic Islam is a whole esoteric thing that,
That's what doesn't make sense to me, though. If there's a lot of bad in it, then why should we say, okay, that thing is still legit?
Yeah, I mean, if it's one piece, you can't be like, okay, I like this part.
Yeah, we're not talking about like our parents where we have no choice. Yeah, they did the best that they can. With the religion, you have the choice to say, well, no, I mean, fuck it, I'm not that, or I am that. Yeah,
but see, look, you're looking at religion in a very black and white way.
But
right?
religion is black and white
to a lot of people. Right? So for me, like, let me tell you again, like, I don't pray. You know what I mean? I don't go on, I drink alcohol, right? But I will say from a heritage perspective, there's certain things about Islam that resonate with me on a subconscious level.
Right.
Like the stress for justice, right? It's not only an Iranian attribute. It's only an Iranian attribute because it's wedded to Islam, right? When we look at that martyrdom of Imam Hussein, right? There's multiple ways to interpret that martyrdom, right? Some people who dislike Islam, there's a lot of Iranians, by the way, they'll be like, oh, Imam Hussein was just this power-hungry person who rose up and he failed. He died in rebellion for power, right? Then there's like, nah, who cares about whether he's infallible or not? Who cares about all that, right? He was someone who was surrounded, who saw what those had done to his grandfather's religion, who took Islam and made it into the hierarchy that the Prophet Muhammad opposed, right? The Prophet Muhammad opposed the hierarchy system in Mecca, right? After the first 4 caliphs, the Umayyad dynasty took Islam and made it into a dynasty, right? It was the first time, it went from being like the leadership was chosen through consensus to becoming a family dynasty again.
So basically you're saying there's a lot of great things that we can take out of it.
Wait, hold on. You gotta let me hear just the last point, right? I'm sorry.
All right, let's do this.
When Hussein revolted, in the Battle of Karbala, in Ashura, in 680 AD, it was a multi-day siege, and he was surrounded by a force who no one really knows.
With 72
companions, right? And the number that he was facing, some people say 1,000, some people say as much as 30,000, right? And he chose to die on his feet and live on his knees.
Okay.
Like Rhaegar Targaryen.
Like Jon Snow. Like Jon Snow. Anyway, so like, where and like even Gandhi wasn't a Muslim, But Ghani that was part of his heritage, in so much as he took a lesson from Imam Hussein.
Really?
And so many people throughout history. Imam Hussein, that sacrifice isn't just a Muslim sacrifice. Isn't just a Shiite Muslim, because there was no Shiites at the time.
Yeah.
In the way we understand it today. It wasn't something relegated to the Middle East or to the sands of Karbala, nothing like that.
Yeah.
His death has resonated through history. It's part of that shared human heritage. By me acknowledging it, if that makes me a quasi-Muslim, so be it.
All right.
So, but are we going to completely ignore the things that may actually have the makeup for disaster and terror and all the negative thing that happens around the world?
So there's this
why can't we just say there are some good, let's use that, implement that, but Islam as a whole has a lot of flaws.
So look,
why should someone be afraid of saying that?
No, you shouldn't be afraid of saying it. But
let's all religions in general, in my opinion. I used to be like, I believe in all religions. That was my standpoint, because my thing is love. And if that's what makes me get closer to you. But now I'm at a point where I feel like that's actually doing more harm than good. And I think at some point we need to say that all religion is bullshit. It's backward thinking, and we need to understand that we're humans first and religion comes second. When we say religion first, all of a sudden we're creating separation. So naturally it's hatred. Naturally it's a condescending tone. Naturally it's judgment. And I don't agree with that, and I think that's ugly. It separates us from each other, right?
Yeah, I feel you, right?
But that's but as long as people like yourself, like in a position to teach the youth, are like kind of like, I'm asking you if you're Muslim, and you had a beautiful, speech about it, but at the end of the day, you're kind of ignoring all the other stuff that is also damaging.
Look, so there's this really good book by Asif Pouya, another professor, socialist, called Making Islam Democratic.
Right.
He basically says that, look, Islam, like I said, it's just a discourse. What you do with it says more about you as an individual than it does about these texts. You feel me? Like, you could be a horrible, horrible person. Take Islam, interpret it a certain way. Take Islam a certain way and bring down 2 towers in New York. Or you could be another Muslim who takes the same book and says exactly what you just said. Like, I went to a Friday sermon today, and he's like, look, labels are good and they're bad. This is a imam saying this today. He's like, labels are good and they're bad. They're good in the sense that they, if I'm an Iranian, or if he's an Iraqi, or if he's a Muslim, or if he's an Arab, or he's from California, we by using these labels, we belong to a certain community. We find a sense of like commonality and a place of home in a way, right? Sounds great.
Yeah.
Then he's like, but labels can be also bad, because if I'm Iranian and you're Arab, then we're different by adopting these labels, and that difference can lead to otherizing somebody, dehumanizing them, and then ultimately leading to violence.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Label is essentially ego. It's this false illusion of I'm something. You're not something. You're just what you've created in your head to be.
Yeah.
And that's my point is to say, stop that. Fuck that ego. Shatter that ego, because you're not that, right? The Chinese are committing suicide for making these iPhones, and we're okay with that because they're Chinese. So let's put a tent around it so when they jump, they fall on these things. But if these people were in Idaho, we wouldn't be using these phones right now, right? So just because they're Chinese now, it's okay. Same thing with religion. So I'm like, why do we have to say religion is good?
So it's not correct, but I tell you why. One issue is that basically you want to say that, okay, so let's say from Islam, these things are good. Let's take whatever you think is good out of it, and not label it Islam, and follow that, and follow whatever else is good from other things, right? And that is the right way to go about it. But when it comes to the masses, the issue is that when people are confused and they want to know what to do, they need it to be in a package or a doctrine, and automatically there's going to be a lot of bullshit that comes along, so it's difficult to just spread something and spread a message that's basically not in a book. You know what I mean? It's just like take a bunch of whatever you like out of it, and what do you call that? And if you call it something, again, it becomes another doctrine, and then over time people are going to add shit to it. So it's just like I don't know.
But Yahya is answering his own question, right? He's saying that Islam has good and bad, labels are bad, but then he says it's the ego that's the problem.
Right, or the labeling.
So which is it? Because that ego, depending on that person, is what takes Islam and does something bad with it or something good with it. So is the problem Islam, or is it the ego?
My problem is with religion in general.
No. I know what your problem is.
Right.
But what you said, you're talking about Islam has these good and these bad things. Why do we need it? It's labeled.
Well,
and stuff. But then
I-
you're talking about the ego.
Well, I was just paraphrasing what you were saying because I asked you, okay, then do you have a problem with Islam, or are you a Muslim? And then you mentioned the good parts about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, yeah, there's some good parts. That's what I was. I was paraphrasing your words.
And I would say that the good parts and the bad parts depend on the individual. Like for me, I'm trying to be a good person, and I see the good that I could take from it. There are people who are
But why
bad.
can't there be a yes or no answer?
There are
That yes, I
because
am
it's
Muslim.
not that
No,
black
I'm
and
Muslim.
white. There's not that black and white. There are bad people who take Islam and do what they want for their objectives. Now, why?
But I was asking you that question, and I said, do I have the permission to ask you this personal
Yeah, of
question?
course.
But you didn't say yes or no, right?
Because it warrants a wider conversation, right? Because in America right now, especially in the Iranian community, if you say yes to I'm a Muslim, you're already categorized, right? And I don't fit neatly in these categories. I really don't, right? So for me, it's an opportunity to get into a wider discussion that is not a discussion I just made up in thin air. To me, it makes perfect sense. Everyone makes perfect sense to themselves.
Yeah.
I don't, not always.
I don't know. I guess it's just for me, it becomes confusing when somebody, doesn't give a straight answer to that. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you afraid of answering that question? Because then I was going to go somewhere with that. But,
No, because there's, like I said, like, to some Muslims, I am not a Muslim. I will never give them that authority to tell me what I am and what I'm not.
But I was asking
right?
you that
Yeah.
question.
But see, the thing is, like I said, I don't fit these categories very neatly, right? And none of us really do, right? And you're also evolving. Like you, at one point, we're like all religions are great and every peace and love, and which is great. But now you're evolving to something else, right? It's a trial and error. It's really a trial and error. I've been consistent about this for a few years now, right? For a long time. But that's still, I haven't made up my mind about anything. Everything we've all.
That's a good answer.
Me and Erfan and I have known
Mm.
each other for 20 years. Do you recognize me when you see me compared to how it was back in the day?
Very different.
Hell no, yeah.
Of course.
And so still, even now, we think we know what we're talking about, right? We just have to be open, right? And we have to remember not to give blanket generalizations. We don't like it when they do it to us. We don't like it when Americans say Iranians or Muslims or Arabs and Middle Easterners are terrorists, right? But then we should also not be doing that when it comes to Islam.
Yeah. Well, everybody picks and chooses, right? Chris Rock had this funny bit, he's like, everybody either say like, yo, no, I'm liberal, I'm conservative, I'm liberal, and he's like,
Yeah,
you can't be every, you can't, you're not either or, it's like crime and murder, I'm conservative.
Prostitution?
Drugs and prostitution, I'm liberal.
But essentially, that's what divide and conquer comes from, right? I mean, the stupid two-party system comes from. It's always separation, and they're trying to find ways, or we find ways to separate each other from.
It also gives
from
you like
one
you have a
another.
choice, when they,
The illusion of choice,
Yeah.
where we need to at some point evolve as human beings and raise our consciousness and say, look, we're not this and we're not that.
So who's doing the dividing then? That's the issue.
Well,
right?
Okay.
That-
Can I say something?
Flags
In
and
my experience
nationalism.
with you, in regards to that question, you are, because you're not really standing up for anything in particular. So at least we can work around that. You said the good parts about Islam, right? So when you don't take a stand, I wouldn't know which way to go.
No,
because people look up to you.
I've taken a stand.
Right.
For sure.
Okay.
I'm someone. So look, your actions have to match your words,
Right.
right? I espouse justice. Sounds really good. Makes me feel really good about myself, right? I'm trying to figure out a way. So I chose a career where I could teach stuff that's really important to me.
Absolutely.
I teach modern Middle East history, right? I don't feel like I'm doing anything just.
Okay.
In my classrooms, I get to rail against imperialism, foreign interventions, overthrow of democratic governments all day.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I'm doing anything just, right? But for me, that when you say I don't stand for anything, I do. It's just not.
In regards to that question, I didn't mean you as a human
Yeah.
being. By the way.
I
Let's
st-
make that
I'm
clear. I
try-
have a lot of respect
You have
for you.
not backbone.
I love you
And
guys.
throughout the past 10 years, I've came to you for a lot of
I love you
mentorship and
guys.
questions. So I want to make that clear to the audience. He's actually one of my mentors when it comes to a lot of different
Oh,
areas.
there we go.
But
Yeah.
it was just in regards to that question, are you Muslim or not? Which he still didn't answer.
No, yes, but not in the way that most people understand it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
I gave a longer answer before. I'm gonna give a shorter one.
Like,
Yes,
if there was
all
a-
right. So you said yes. That's
Yeah.
what I wanted.
Yeah.
So then I wanted to know: was it hard for you to? Well, I don't want to ask too many questions. Like,
No, I'm just.
I'm
gonna
not
say
holding
if
the
it was
mic
like
hostage.
I was just. I was just saying, like, if it was a question on a test and I have 4 options A, B, C, and D: Muslim, Jewish, Catholic,
or atheist, right? You could put
or
atheist or
atheist.
agnostic.
You
But
would
look,
check Muslim.
in 2017, the United States, to also say you're Muslim, even if you don't, follow all the guidelines or believe in all of it,
Right.
you're taking a stand,
Mhm.
right? You're standing for those who are being marginalized because of the way they look. Because
That's
of their
why I
facial hair,
asked you
and
that
I
question.
stand with them.
That's why I asked you
100%.
that question.
I have a beard not because I think it's stylish, because half of it's white by now. Although some people like that.
Yeah. Keep
But
fooling
because
yourself.
I'm not trying to be something that I'm not, and it's part of that heritage.
I get it. No, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm taking
yeah.
a stand, 100%.
Yeah, but I think just these things of just like a lot of people who basically claim they are Muslim, but we don't believe in certain parts of it, or we take. I mean, I think that's what essentially probably happened with Christianity over time too, but it just keeps having different branches of the religion, and it's probably gonna go that way with Islam too over time. And I mean, it's happened like that with almost every religion. Almost. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but yeah.
Well, one can certainly hope so, unless these Russians start becoming the bad guys again, right? There's
Russians
always one
always
bad guy.
been the bad guys.
When
When it comes to Iran,
The
definitely.
early '90s movies, you know how the Russians were those guys.
Oh, dude, fuck all that.
Rocky
man.
IV.
I'm thinking.
1986.
Dude, fuck all that. I'm thinking Iranian history. I mean, Russia has been fucked us like over and over time, so many times. You know, I mean, so.
So
But, yeah.
I want to comment on that real quick,
Go ahead.
right? So we Iranians have this like sense of victimhood. Like everyone, these Arabs invaded Iran, the British, the Americans
Yeah,
overthrew
yeah,
our government, the Russians.
Yeah.
How do you think we've had 3 empires at the least? We had
Yeah.
the Achaemenid Empire, we had the Sasanian Empire, and we had the Safavid Empire.
Definitely.
We didn't get those empires by going and passing out scented rice.
No,
You know what I mean?
Saffron.
We
and
did that.
That
sounds
Yeah.
really
No, I totally get that. But what I'm saying is, like, I'm just saying modern history, and again, yeah, it's like this patriotism that I have in me, and always whoever's from any country, if someone attacks you, you're gonna be like,
For sure.
bitter about it. But
That's that
basically,
tribalism, though.
there were
That's
many-
that tribalism
there
that
were
he's
many-
talking about,
I
like
was
divide and conquer.
No, I was referring to because there's many treaties that they pretty much like basically they broke their promise on over time, and But
The
we
powerful
probably
break,
moved on
the
that.
powerful break promises left and right. Nobody
Yeah.
has broken more promises than the British.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Delete
Ruthless.
that part. Delete that part.
No.
I want to make some money
No,
off
it's like-
this podcast.
No,
Don't
I
you
mean-
dare speaking about the Zionists and the British.
No, I'm
Uh,
kidding.
I
Look,
mean,
he was
they-
ready to answer that too. He's like,
I
no,
love America.
The
America.
queen.
America.
The queen's my girl. But yeah. I want to come back to Saudi Arabia for a bit. You had this tweet basically, I think it was last night, and you said that they're basically affecting the whole region right now in a negative way. And I wanted to know if it's you kind of talked about it a little bit about the doctrine and the Wahhabi doctrine that they spread, and the anti-Shia thing. So is it, you think, that in general, or is it because of the more recent pressures that they have on Qatar and things in Yemen and like more recent?
So one thing is, they for the past 30 years have been spreading Wahhabism to counter Iran, but also, like I said, they are an anti-democratic. There's a lot of There's a lot of forces that want to subvert democracy in the Middle East.
So that's what you mean by destabilizing.
Yeah.
the
So,
region?
for instance, just the Saudis tried to stop the spread of the Iranian revolution by promoting Wahhabism, because they were worried it might spread to their own country or serve as an exemplar for action in their own country. Same thing with the Arab Spring, right? When Ben Ali in Tunisia fled, he fled to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And when he went to Saudi Arabia, the Saudis scolded him. They're like, "Why did you leave? You should have stayed and fought." Right? And then when the uprising in Tunisia spread to Egypt, and Obama and Hillary Clinton at the time was Secretary of State, were supporting the Mubarak regime until the last days of the first phase of the uprising, when Obama ultimately basically let the SCAF overthrow Mubarak, the Saudis are upset. They're very upset because they don't want these revolutions spreading, because it might spread to their own country. So they've been working very closely with their allies, especially the Emiratis, to subvert the revolution. How? They first things first. They sent in with the Emiratis a security force to help put down the non-violent uprising in Bahrain.
Yeah.
In 2013, they supported the coup in Egypt. Egypt's first and only democratic elected government in the history, in the long, 5,000-6,000 year history of Egypt, was overthrown, and the Saudis were quick to write checks to the Sisi governments, right? Then they are basically bombing the crap out of the poorest country in the Middle East, Yemen. Right? To subvert revolution there. They've sent the most hardline, fascist jihadi forces to Syria. Not because they want a Jeffersonian democracy in Syria, but they want to make sure if the Bashar al-Assad regime falls, it falls in the hands of people that will replicate the system in Saudi Arabia in Syria. Right? And what other countries are there? They're everywhere.
But that's basically what's going on right now. Iran and Saudi are constantly trying to make friends and control these other countries.
Yeah, so the Iranian government too. They're not a democratic force, right? Yeah. They want to make sure that governments that come to power in their region aren't fully democratic because they might reignite the green movements because it almost did when the uprising happened in Tunisia and spread to Bahrain and Egypt. This is when Mousavi and Kadhafi were put on house arrest. Yeah. The slogan was on February 14th. The slogan was Ben Ali Mubarak Ben Ali Mubarak Nobat Sayyid Ali, or Ben Ali Mubarak Nobat Sayyid Ali, something like that, right? It was Ben Ali fell in Tunisia.
Rhyme well, but yeah,
it rhymed better. Ben Ali fell in Tunisia.
It was in Arabic, maybe.
No, it was in Persian in Iran.
Oh.
Ben Ali fell, Mubarak fell, now it's Sayyid Ali's turn in Iran. And there was protests, small ones, on February 14th, 2000.
Yeah.
So Iran is not a democratic force in the region either, right? It wants to make sure that if there's going to be a revolution, it's going to be one that's going to be closer to Iran's version.
Yeah.
The Saudis would know. And the same with the Israelis. The Israelis are not a democratic force. They love to say they're the most democratic country in the region, but they don't want democracy for other countries, because democracy for other countries in the Middle East, especially the Arab countries, means that pro-Palestinian leaders will come to power through elections, because those peoples in those regions are pro-Palestinian. So they too were very hostile. The Israeli government was very hostile towards the uprising in Egypt. Very hostile. And the United States is the same. They don't want an actual bona fide democratic government. They overthrow democratic governments in the Middle East, like they did in Iran in 1953.
Yeah, every country looks out for their own interests. You know, so.
But see, there's a paradox though, right? Because the United States is the beacon of democracy, is the oldest democracy in the world, and Americans love to think that we do good onto the world.
I fucking hate that, man. I hate that bullshit about people actually claiming to go to Iraq, Afghanistan, all these countries for like liberating the people, creating democracy.
It's obscene. It's vulgar. It's so vulgar, right? So when Saudi Arabia tries to subvert democracy, it makes sense because they're not a democratic force. They've never been, and democracy is a threat to them. But when the United States does it, as Americans living here, it's such a problem because we're not living up to our own ideals. We should be empowering democracy, or at least not getting in the way of it.
I like how you ended that. That was strong.
Goddamn.
That was passionate.
That's good.
I like that.
That's good acting.
How much are they paying you?
Here? Man, I'm about to get deported.
Well, can you go back
so
to
funny.
Iran, or are you going to go to Iran?
You know, I've been to much of the Middle East. I don't know, as much as like, I'm not, I have political views.
I still don't know who's paying you. Like,
yo,
some sort of double.
That's
standard?
actually good that you don't know, because no one's. The only people that are paying me is the crappy salary I'm getting from MIT, right? But if you can't tell which government I support because I'm critical of all of them, then that's a good thing.
Well, here's the thing.
Or you're playing all of them.
And
No.
in person, I can't tell, right? But on your social media, it's very obvious, I guess, to some extent, or you're a little bit more clear on your point and the points that you'd like to make, which is interesting because when I talk to you in person, you seem a lot more open-minded and liberal. But somebody looks at your Twitter, it seems like you're really like keying on Israel and the Saudis, for example,
and U.S. intervention.
Yeah. So do you find, and I don't want to get into that and why you do that, but my question is, as someone that cares about reaching out to people and making an impact, do you find that maybe somewhat counterproductive at times because
I come across as imbalanced?
I mean, you're saying that, but my thing is, if a Saudi hears it or an Israeli person hears it, their guards are gonna be up.
Sure.
And they're like already gonna have this idea of you not liking them. So they're gonna shut down and they're gonna say, I'm not listening to this guy. This guy, all he cares about is his own point. So, in other words, that's indirectly spreading unwanted hatred or divide and conquer that we're talking about.
I feel you. No, it's a good.
So do you feel like maybe it's ego that's coming into play, or what else, or do you believe that's the way to handle the situation?
All right, so Zook, I love the question, by the way. Right.
Well,
First of all, but
it's important to me.
Here's the thing, though. When you say they might not, they may feel that Pouya may not like them, right? We often conflate criticism of government versus criticism of an entire people, right? There's a fundamental difference there, right? And governments make that claim too, right? They would love nothing more, like the U.S. government, the Iranian government, they would love nothing more for a foreigner to criticize the government and then the population to be offended. These are not one and the same.
Okay.
Criticizing government is criticizing government and government only, and policy only. Do not conflate criticism of a government versus criticism of them and the people and the Constitution or a book or a holy book or a set of ideals, right? We have to be able to criticize any government, and that if one person, like if an American who may not even be a Trump supporter, here's me criticizing a U.S. foreign policy and they get personally offended as an American, that's not my feeling. That's their feeling. I may have to sugarcoat it and massage their ego so they don't get offended. But criticizing policy and having someone get personally offended for it, that's their ego coming into play.
But if they look at your Twitter, you're not criticizing the Iranian government too much. Maybe you are at points, right? But if I'm really looking at the majority of it, you're keying in on two different things.
Good.
And you're not keeping it balanced.
All right, that's the second point you brought up.
Okay.
So I spent 3 years. I wrote a 325-page dissertation.
Wow.
325. I had to research this shit in Persian. And as someone who grew up speaking English, researching in Persian is so hard for me. It's so slow.
Dude, call me, man. Call me.
So slow. Man, I called my dad. My dad's a proper translator. Because when I was translating, I had to make sure it was proper translations. You know what I mean?
You can call me daddy.
That would have been good, actually. And so I devoted a lot of heart and a lot of effort into this dissertation. And it's in the hands of an academic press.
Okay.
I'm still waiting to hear back. It won I got the International Society for Iranian Studies, a very prestigious international association for Iranian studies, awarded my dissertation with an award. There was a very prestigious university press there. They asked to read it. They liked it. They sent it off to 4 reviewers to see if the argument is sound. Right? There's a chance it'll be published as an academic book that you'll see on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever.
Wow.
If you ever read it, if it ever gets published, I really don't know, right? Because it's just like I'm a little bit contentious. And like I could rub people the wrong way. The dissertation is like that too, right? So I don't know who these reviewers are. They may like get offended, right? But if it ever gets published and you read it, you'll know that I'm actually very balanced. Why you don't see me talking about it on social media a lot, and I zero in on these things?
Yeah.
That comes from a specific positionality that I have as an Iranian in the United States, right? So there is no threat of war between the United States and Saudi Arabia. There is no threat of war between the United States and Israel. There is very much a threat of war between the United States and Iran.
Okay.
Always. Right? And so, as an academic, as someone who has Twitter followers, right?
Whose side would you totally
I can't lend them. I'm critical of the Iranian government. You know, my dissertation will speak to that. There's no doubt about it if you ever read a dissertation. That I put my life and soul into it. But publicly, it's hard for me to criticize the Iranian government if it means that it'll be taken as legitimating U.S. intervention in Iran. Because I have a certain positionality, and you all do too. If you may not be advocating for position. Like if you guys are musicians, right? If you come out with a song.
Well, my position is being non-positional. That's where I stand. To be
in the bedroom.
Why is that the first thing that came to my mind too?
I gotta ask Freud
Well,
for
you just
that.
said with my position immediately. Yeah.
I mean, and I was asking because I wanted to see if maybe I should be less of that and more of what you're doing, and why should I be that? You know, that's really why I'm asking that question. It's very important for me to be able to speak to people on a universal level. it's very important for me to do that. And as you being a professor, you know, I want to know, why do you take that route?
So the thing is, as Americans, as taxpayers, we are enabling a lot of the stuff that Israel is doing to the Palestinians. We just signed a $110 billion military contract, the most sophisticated weapons on this planet, to enable Saudi Arabia to continue to bomb the poorest country in the Middle East, right? So criticizing that is to criticize that injustice, right? But when I use my positionality, and I criticize the Iranian government day and night, right? But I don't want to empower those who want to take my criticism, our legitimate criticism of the Iranian government. I don't want to empower them who seek actual intervention in Iran, military intervention in Iran, because the threat is so real.
So basically what you're saying is, if you do step out of that position, you may come up misunderstood.
Easily. So even right now, right? So in my dissertation is so critical of the Iranian government that if it gets published, I have to write a whole preface that in no way should this be taken under no terms to be misunderstood as I advocating for foreign intervention in Iran.
Yeah, you know,
because people thought it's not that crazy, right? There is such a real threat. For a little country like Cuba in 1959 underwent a revolution. It's still being embargoed. We just have political relations now, but it's still being embargoed, right? When a powerless third world country defies the United States, it is made an example of.
Yeah, Cuba's like a time capsule, basically.
Yeah, and for the Americans, when a bearded, Arab-looking country like Iran defied the United States and took hostages, the United States didn't let that shit go. It supported the Iraqi invasion of Iran, gave satellite intelligence to the Iraqis, so the Iraqis knew where to use those chemical weapons on Iranian soldiers. And then when the Iranians went to the UN to get a UN Security Council resolution to condemn Iraq's chemical weapon use, the United States vetoed it, right? The Iranians themselves had chemical weapons, they didn't use it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was because Iran defied the United States.
Yeah.
So 8 years of war backed by the United States, and then sanctions and sanctions and sanctions and sanctions.
Yeah, and that war, the Iran-Iraq war, essentially like depleted all the military power that the Shah had put together.
And a whole generation of
debt,
a whole
and so
generation. There was
young people
more
died.
Iranians that died in the Iranian-Iraq war than all Americans in World War II. Let me say that again. More Iranians died in the Iranian-Iraq war than all the Americans combined in all the different theaters of war in World War II. In the Pacific theater and the European theater, more Iranians died than Americans.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, because it's so many of them were basically human shields and untrained,
minesweepers.
You know, just young people, you know, fighting for the ideology, fighting for the country out of patriotism. It's horrible.
So to my point, it's real. You know, I'm critical of the Iranian government. But I don't want that criticism to be taken, because Americans would love to be like, look, even these Iranians. Look at these Iranians. This MIT prof, or this MIT historian, or this musician, or that musician, or this idiot on Shaws of Sunset, right? Look at these people. They too want us to save them from their government.
Well, that's going a little too extreme.
Nah, it's not extreme.
Don't compare yourself with Shahs of Sunset guy. You're a college professor that speaks very powerfully. So don't do that, because that's going extreme, right? That's the jihad in you. No, I'm kidding.
No. I think he's mean as an Iranian, you know, saying that, you know, someone's supporting the wrong.
They did that with the Iraq war. When the United States wanted to invade Iraq in 2003, they paraded Iraqis, expat Iraqis in the United, like Ahmed Chalabi being the most prominent of them all. And look, even these Iraqis. And Rumsfeld was like, we're going to be greeted as liberators. They're going to make, if there ever comes a time for war with Iran, they will be making the same argument. They're going to be parading Iranian experts, and they're going to position themselves as experts, but they're not. They're career opportunists. Absolutely. They're all over DC. Fakhravar being one of them. He's not an academic, but he's one of those opportunists. I think his name. Fakhravar.
I'm not familiar with him.
He's one of these like prominent Iranian political prisoners that got freed, went to DC, and now is one of these more powerful Iranian, what we call native informants, who basically like lend their knowledge of Iran, they lend it to power. They lend it to the government to use against Iran. And these are what we call in academia native informers. They use their specialized knowledge of the terrain, of the culture, of that history. Even if they're not academics, they present themselves as experts. And they lend that knowledge and credibility to the government for political purposes, right? And so if there is ever a time for war with Iran, you're going to see a whole parade of Iranian experts coming on TV talking about how Iranians are going to welcome America as liberators. They're going to greet them with scented rice over their heads and all that trash.
Mm-hmm. That shit ain't gonna happen.
Sure,
That's
hell
for
no.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I understand your point. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily I would do it that way. I'm not saying I would even agree because who am I to say that? But I just believe that maybe that's where we are as a collective consciousness. Maybe we're not there yet to look up to somebody that is very neutral. As our leader, as somebody that we want to look up to. We still need to look at somebody that is wearing a jersey. That's pretty much where what people are doing.
Wait, hold on.
But I think in terms of following somebody that...
You're talking about Colin Kaepernick. When you say jersey?
Oh, no, I just meant by dividing each other through a jersey or separation.
Okay. Yeah, the jersey I thought was a sports reference. Because Colin Kaepernick is a proper leader.
Right.
Well, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely doing something, right?
For sure.
Yeah,
His words, his deeds are matching his words. Right?
Definitely. And he's paying the price for it, absolutely.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
I read on your bio on your website that you're a strong supporter of the flat Earth theory, and I'm totally kidding. No,
I think you're mistaken with Shaquille O'Neal.
Just wanted to see a reaction on that. It's amazing how many people believe in it. I don't want to go in that avenue.
Flat Earth theory and that the sun revolves around the Earth. Just some people believe in stuff like that.
Yeah. Then they have these like little 3D models that they made on YouTube.
Let's try to make.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say we're kind of short on time. I wanted to see if you guys.
Where do you stand
where we're gonna go?
On people like Sam Harris? What do you think about him? Do you think he has an agenda? Do you think...
I don't think he's credible. Who is he? He's a neuroscientist. Why is he talking about Islam? Has he done seminary studies? Does he actually know Arabic? He says he knows Arabic, right? I studied Arabic for 4 years. I still wouldn't say I know Arabic. I had proper, boot
but what
camp
does that
Arabic.
mean? Because he doesn't have a degree, he can't make a strong opinion?
No. If you're going to position
then
yourself...
how does our president become the president? He definitely doesn't have the academic...
Well, that shouldn't have happened.
No.
But it did.
Yeah.
To position yourself as an expert on a specific religion, like Islam, you have to know Arabic, 100%. And you have to know the main texts. And you almost have to go to seminary school. Almost. Or some degree. Not neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Sam Harris is just... When he comes there and says Islam is the mother of all bad ideas, like that's his ego talking, right? That's his very rudimentary, basic black and white understanding of Islam. Oh, and then there's Bill Maher, right? Who they just like sit together and they just like affirm one another. And Bill Maher's like, yeah, there's this poll in the Middle East that says like 99% of people still believe in like death for those who like leave their faith. I'm like, dog, there's so many Americans who believe in the weirdest stuff about Christianity. So what? They're not carrying it out. You know what I mean? Like. Yeah. You talk to anybody, our own family members, they'll tell you weird stuff, but they're not actually implementing with a knife to people's throats. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to terrorism, that's the issue, right? Because if you look at these holy texts, there's much more violence in the Old Testament than there is in the Quran. There's a lot of violence in the Bible too, right? But then they'd be like, oh, well, Christians and Jews aren't doing suicide bombings, and Muslims are, right? Therefore, there's violence in all religions, but there's a specific kind of violence that's real in Islam that actually causes people to commit violence. Therefore, Islam is inherently violent and the mother of all bad ideas, like what Sam Harris will say. And they don't think about the fact that suicide bombing, for instance, is a modern phenomenon. 30, 40 years old. Islam has been around for 1,400 years. What is it about now where you see suicide bombing and actual jihadi violence? Right? And the answer to that isn't in the Quran. It's in the wars that have been waged on the region that has radicalized population and tore the social fabric of these cultures and countries, right?
But you don't think it's the history of martyrdom? You don't think that has a little bit to do it, or the things that you kind of pointed as good things? You don't think we have a little bit of that?
So even Imam Hussein's martyrdom, right?
Right.
It was only politicized 40 years ago, right? So usually when it comes to Ashura, it's a day of mourning. Right? Now, even before the Iranian Revolution, Imam Musa Sadr in Lebanon, Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir Sadr in Iraq, Shariati and Khomeini and them in Iran in the 60s and 70s.
Name dropping.
took Shiism and took Imam Hussein's death and they politicized it to inspire their passive populations to mobilize for change. And they basically said, look, it is not enough to just mourn his death. Actually, if you just mourn his death, you are desecrating his legacy. Okay. If you properly want to mourn his death, you have to take inspiration from it. It's not enough to just beat your chest. Why did he die? He died resisting tyranny. And if you want to learn something from him, then you too should fight and potentially die resisting tyranny. Right? So even when you say Shiism or martyrdom is a thing that exists in our culture, it was only politicized 30, 40 years ago.
Correct.
All of these jihadi groups that you see are products of intervention. There was no Al-Qaeda. There was no Taliban until the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and Ronald Reagan mobilized a global jihad, what we in academia jokingly call Reagan's jihad, and mobilized a legion of extremists to go and fight.
As a resistance to fight. Yeah.
And the idea was the United States wanted to get revenge on the Soviet Union for what the Soviet Union did to Americans in Vietnam. And the reason why they organized an international legion of jihadi fighters as opposed to a national Afghan one is because if they only supported the Afghan fighters against the Soviet Union, then there'd be room for a national reconciliation or negotiation. And then for the Sam Harris types, the atheist types, and atheism is almost like a whole new religion itself, right? It's almost as dogmatic, right? Islam is the quintessential problem, right? Because, especially in the Cold War, right? The debate was between East and West. And then in the middle of this debate between East and West, between communism and liberal and capitalism, the Iranian Revolution, this is why the Iranian Revolution is so interesting. Not because we're Iranians, right? I always tell this to my students. Right? The Iranian Revolution is so interesting. Not because I'm an Iranian, but because in the middle of this global Cold War, one country, third world country, said no, neither East nor West, only Islam. Even Foucault was enthralled by the Iranian Revolution, right? A lot of these European philosophers who were modern and still kind of believed in some sort of spirituality, believe it or not, looked to Iran with hope, right?
We're still waiting for Sean Connery to make that movie. By
right? I always thought he looked so much like him.
That meme.
They look just like each other.
Yeah.
There's a meme for
I
that?
swear to God. I
Really?
swear to God, I was the first person to think about that. I thought about that from when I was like a teenager, And then years later, I saw a meme. I was like, holy shit, I should have made that meme. But the reason I'm not commenting too much about this subject as you brought up is because I don't like talking about it because, people like Sam Harris or on either side, it doesn't matter. So that's what comes to dividing people, and I don't like it. I mean, what's your point? Like, what point are you trying to make? Okay, so now let's say the Prophet Muhammad was this and that, and you're just basically pissing off a bunch of Muslims when it's not helping. It's not the right way to approach it. Now what? Okay.
They're trying.
And that's my thing, and I'm sorry to cut you off. Is to me because he is a smart human being. There's no question about that.
He's a good neuroscientist.
So if someone's that smart, makes me wonder, why would you take that angle? There's something in there that maybe I'm not seeing that meets the eye. Because you're too smart to take that angle. You know better. So what are you gaining?
True, man. Smart people have done stupid shit all throughout history.
People believe shit.
You know what I mean? Like Heidegger is this famous German philosopher who was really excited about Nazi Germany.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he's really smart. And he failed hard there.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean so. The thing is, when they talk about Islam, this is that positionality that I'm talking about, right? When they talk about Black Lives Matter on CNN. Black Lives Matter on CNN. You always see black activists talking about it because they know it. They feel it in their bones, right? When they talk about Islam, it's Sam Harris, Bill Maher, and Ben Affleck, right? Where are the Muslim scholars, right? They don't want to give voice to them. Because it's easier for these idiots who don't know about Islam to pontificate about Islam because there's no real scholar to be invited to counter them.
Well, they bring Aslan, right?
No, I'm talking about a specific debate, the famous one.
Okay.
When Sam Harris said, and Reza Aslan is the exception, right? Usually CNN or on these other shows, it's always just like white people or maybe like Cornel West talking about Islam. I think Cornel West drops the ball when he talks about Islam, right? But it was Sam Harris doesn't know shit about Islam. And I'm not saying this because I disagree with him. He just doesn't. Bill Maher, who he's just he thinks he's he thinks he's neutral because he hates all religions. But when it comes to Islam, he has a specific political agenda. It's palpable. I don't know if you guys sense
his eyes light up.
Yeah. If you guys seen this film Religulous, he makes fun of all the religions. Oh, look at these Orthodox Jews on the Sabbath, they don't want to touch the phone because it's electronic, so they touch this thing that touches the dial, right? And look how funny and cute they are. And when it came to that Islamic component of his film, he got real political. He got real political, right? He has a political agenda when it comes to Islam. But they were sitting there agreeing with each other, pontificating, feeling good about each other. And poor Ben Affleck, and I'm happy at least he was there, was getting offended for everybody else, but he didn't really know what to say. He was like, no, that's racist. What are you guys talking about? You guys are generalizing. And then Sam Harris was like, well, I'm actually an expert. I know what I'm saying. And and that's the debate on Islam in the United States.
Yeah. And I don't fucking like it because it's like basically dividing, and it's just causing all these large separation and a really big hate for Islam when it didn't exist 30, 40 years ago when our dads came to this country. They were like going to college here. None of this existed. There weren't suicide bombers. There was and after the Crusades, basically, there wasn't any big issue around the world between like Muslims and Christians, and so this is all new stuff that happened after the Palestinian-Israeli thing, and also then after
and just to echo what you're saying,
over there for so long,
just to echo what you're saying, the Arab-Israeli conflict too, as much as people want to present it as a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims, it's not. It's gaining a religious dimension more and more by the day. But there was no Hamas 50 years ago. The founders of Zionism were secular Jews, many of them atheists, right? Many of them influenced by socialism and Eastern Europe, right? And the Palestinians are Muslim, Christian, secular, whatever, right? It's just becoming more and more religious now, right? Especially since 1967, in the 6-Day War, in the 6-Day War, where Israel launched a surprise attack because it felt there was an imminent attack by Egypt. It launched a surprise attack and captured all this territory, conquered and occupied all this territory, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the Sinai. For a lot of Jews in Israel, it was a miracle. It was like divine providence written all over it. And then for the Palestinians, for the secular Palestinians, or for the religious ones who were fringe at the time, were like, look, we were defeated because we looked to secular ideologies to save us.
Right.
We turned our back on our culture. So they went from being fringe to becoming Hamas. They had been making this argument that we could regain our dignity. We could be victorious again if we harness a political ideology that's one and organic with our background and our culture. The Iranians did it with the Iranian Revolution. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin is all about that. The Muslim Brotherhood is all about that. And all these jihadists, and it's rooted in this doctrine, especially the Sunnis, it's rooted in this doctrine put forth by Sayyid Qutb in Egypt. Sayyid Qutb was a Muslim brother, but a fringe member of the Muslim Brotherhood, who was ultimately executed by Nasser in Egypt. And in prison, throughout his torture, he was already radical. The torture hardened him. And he wrote this book, and it was smuggled out of prison, called Milestones. This book is so dangerous. It's so dangerous. Do not order it on Amazon. You get all profiled right away, right? Super dangerous. And he lays out the ideology for Islamic government.
Right.
Islamic government, right? And completely devoid of any democratic representative process in the government. And he justifies it by saying that, look, this takfirism that right now we see in Syria, where they say, I could kill you, even though you say you're a Muslim, for my political objective, I can't kill you.
Right.
Because you're not really a Muslim, because you don't agree with my ultimate political objective of creating an Islamic state. And when we say Islamic state, we mean a state that is its backbone is Islamic law.
Just watch for your hand in front of the camera a lot.
Oh, is the camera right here?
Vision. Yeah. Continue.
It doesn't look like a friendly Muslim.
So the idea was that, look, if popular sovereignty is a heresy, popular sovereignty, the fact that we make laws, this is the Sayyid Qutb's ideology, the fact that there are laws that are man-made are inherently flawed and they're a form of slavery. The fact that Sayyid Qutb came to the United States in the 50s and was treated like a black person in the 50s because he was Egyptian, a little bit darker skin, was like, look at this man-made democratic system. Look what it does with the racial hierarchy in the United States. And he's burned by it. And he's like, look, ultimate sovereignty belongs to God. And in order to actualize that sovereignty, we got to create a system that's based on Islamic law, right? And this is the ultimate goal. And in order to do that, if you're a real Muslim, I don't care if you pray, fast, and donate and all that. You got to do all that. But you also have to believe in the sixth tenet. There's not 5 tenets in Islam. There's not 5. There's 6. And the sixth one, according to Sayyid Qutb and a lot of jihadists, is jihad. Right? And he's like, we have to fight militarily.
Well, you're right. No,
as a vanguard party, for your right, I guess, to be a Muslim, and create, through armed struggle, an Islamic state. And if we end up killing fellow Muslims in the process, it's justified, because they're not really Muslims. If they're Muslims, they'd be fighting shoulder to shoulder with us, right? This ideology that Sayyid Qutb put down very persuasively in Milestones is more or less the backbone of modern jihad in the Middle East.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I got you. Well, what are we at a time? 150? 140?
Yeah.
145, I think, just about.
We got some editing work to do because we can only take like an hour, 10 minutes. But that shows how enjoyable of a conversation, at least it was to me.
We love it when it naturally flows and goes over an hour,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sweating though.
Me too. That's the room's hot.
Yeah, it gets hot.
No, it's cool
To
actually.
the window, to the wall.
It's like
It is
crossfire,
hot, man. Especially you got that suit on. Hey, man. Well, thank you so much for coming in on the
Yes,
show,
indeed.
my brother. It means a lot. Hopefully, we can get you back on. Hopefully, you enjoyed it too.
I had so much fun. It's good stuff. It's important stuff we
Definitely.
talked about.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
I'll
you as
Check
well.
back in with you soon, and again, thanks for coming.
It's my pleasure. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for coming down. Indeed. Nomad out.
Have a good night, everybody. Well, that was crazy because it's not going to be nighttime necessarily when you watch it, but make sure to subscribe to our channel for updates and new episodes when they come out. And thanks for listening and tuning in and watching.
Peace.